Look well, Ebenezer Scrooge, for only you can see me.
What you want with me?
Much.
Oh, yeah.
In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley.
In life? Why do you trouble me?
It is required of everyone that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. My spirit never walked beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hall. So I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere.
You are fettered. Why?
I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it, link by link. Would you know the weight and length of the coil you bear yourself?
Where does the trope of the ghost in chains begin? Talk of ghosts near Christmas time, and the temptation may well be to think immediately of Jacob Marley from Dickens's Christmas Carol. Yet the idea of a ghost in chains begins much earlier on.
And there are more obscure legends like people having seen dead, diseased relatives just coming, in their homes. And they said, I'm just coming back just to let you know I'm dead, or to prophesy something, and then disappearing.
But then they're ghosts, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. In Rome, there was the ghost, was it Pliny the Elder?
Pliny the Elder?
Yeah, I think so.
Doesn't he describe the oldest ghost story we have so far?
Yeah, because
villa with the sound of chains, clanking chains, was it?
Yeah, and he sees a decrepit old ghost, and he said, "Found my." The ghost doesn't say anything, and then, he realized that he followed apparently the ghost to a spot, and when the ghost stopped, he asked his servants to dig, and they actually found the body of someone. And then the apparition ceased.
It vanished at that point. But then they dug up, what was it? They dug up the gold. He was trying to show him where the gold was buried.
No, I think it's own body. What is own body? It's buried.
Oh, that's a different version then.
Oh. I need to reread the legend.
According to Pliny's letter, there is no mention of buried treasure, although subsequent versions have added this. The philosopher Athenodorus visited Athens and came across the villa, which was going for an absurdly low rate. On inquiry, he discovered its haunted history and, despite this, decided to live in it. When it grew towards evening, he ordered a couch to be prepared for him in the forepart of the house, and after calling for the light, together with his pen and tablets, he directed all his people to retire within. But that his mind might not, for want of employment, be open to the vain terrors of imaginary noises and apparitions, he applied himself to writing with all his faculties. The first part of the night passed with usual silence. Then began the clanking of iron fetters. However, he neither lifted up his eyes nor laid down his pen, but closed his ears by concentrating his attention. The noise increased and advanced nearer till it seemed at the door, and at last in the chamber. He looked round and saw the apparition exactly as it had been described to him. It stood before him, beckoning with one finger. Athenodorus made a sign with his hand that it should wait a little, and bent again to his writing. But the ghost rattling its chains over his head as he wrote, he looked round and saw it beckoning as before. Upon this he immediately took up his lamp and followed it. The ghost slowly stalked along, as if encumbered with its chains, and having turned into the courtyard of the house, suddenly vanished. Athenodorus, being thus deserted, marked the spot with a handful of grass and leaves. The next day he went to the magistrates and advised them to order that spot to be dug up. There they found bones commingled and intertwined with chains, for the body had mouldered away by long lying in the ground, leaving them bare and corroded by the fetters. The bones were collected and buried at public expense, and after the ghost was thus duly laid, the house was haunted no more. Pliny the Younger, Letter 27. Was the old man murdered and buried in secret, the body wrapped in chains to prevent his spirit from moving after death? If so, the chains didn't do what it said on the label, but the chains continue into modern literature as well. Clanking chains, strange and unexpected animal noises, distant footsteps and unearthly howls and shrieks issuing from supposedly empty chambers and towers. These were the sounds that populated Gothic fiction of the 18th century. Anne Radcliffe was a leading proponent. She heard the castle clock strike 11, 12, and yet her mind wavered. The time, however, was now come when she could hesitate no longer. And then the interest she felt for her aunt overcame other considerations, and, bidding Annette follow her to the outer door of the vaulted gallery, and there await her return, she descended from her chamber. The castle was perfectly still, and the great hall, where so lately she had witnessed a scene of dreadful contention, now returned only the whispering footsteps of two solitary figures, gliding fearfully between the pillars, and gleamed only to the feeble lamp they carried. Emily, deceived by the long shadows of the pillars and by the catching lights between, often stopped, imagining she saw some person moving in the distant obscurity of the perspective. And, as she passed these pillars, she feared to turn her eyes toward them, almost expecting to see a figure start out from behind their broad shaft. Anne Radcliffe, The Mysteries of Udolpho, 1794. It is possible chains act as a visual metaphor, illustrating the deep connection that binds the spirit to the land of the living long after death. Unfinished business? Vengeance? Dickens used the idea of chains to display Marley's miserly ways in life. Oscar Wilde goes the opposite way in his story of the Canterville Ghost, for comedic effect. Far from frightening anyone, the Canterville Ghost instead receives recommendations from Mr. Otis that Tammany Rising Sun lubricator will do wonders to oil those noisy feathers, and so keep the noise down. M.R.James kept up the tradition in one of his shorter short stories, Rats. Then, I'll just take a look upstairs in case I've left a book or something out. No, don't trouble, I'll be back in a minute. And as noiselessly as possible he stole to the door and opened it. The shattering of the illusion. He almost laughed aloud. Propped, or you might say sitting, on the edge of the bed was nothing in the round world but a scarecrow. A scarecrow out of the garden, of course, dumped into the deserted room. Yes, but here amusement ceased. Have scarecrows bare, bony feet? Do their heads loll onto their shoulders? Have they iron collars and links of chain about their necks? Can they get up and move, if never so stiffly, across a floor, with wagging head and arms close at their sides, and shiver? The slam of the door, the dash of the stairhead, the leap downstairs were followed by a faint. Awaking, Thompson saw Betts standing over him with a brandy bottle and a very reproachful face. "You shouldn't have done so, sir, really you shouldn't. It ain't a kind way to act by persons as done the best they could for you." Thompson heard words of this kind, but what he said in reply he did not know. Mr. Betts, and perhaps even more Mrs. Betts, found it hard to accept his apologies and his assurances that he would say no word that could damage the good name of the house.
Do you know the author? Well, it's always French. Sorry, I'm coming back to French authors, but Chateaubriand.
Oh.
He's famous basically to be one of the chroniclers of the Second Empire, one of the great writers. I try to remember which of his memoirs, for example, are quite famous because he speaks his time under the Second Empire, his travels throughout America and other parts of the world. And there is a story when you go to his mansion, he used to see, even when he was a kid, a ghost of a black cat.
Ooh.
So he would hear Mel, he would see a silhouette. And apparently, at the beginning of the 20th century, they were making like works on the manor, and they actually broke a wall and they saw the body of a buried cat.
Wow. 10 o'clock sounded on the chateau clock. My father would stop. The same spring which had raised the hammer of the clock seemed to have suspended his steps. He pulled out his watch, wound it, took a large silver candlestick holding a tall candle, went into the small west tower for a moment, then returned, candle in hand, and headed for his bedroom, adjoining the small east tower. Lucille and I stood in his way. We kissed him and wished him good night. He offered us his dry, hollow cheek without replying, walked on, and withdrew into the depths of the tower, the doors of which we heard closing behind him. The spell was broken. My mother, my sister, and I, transformed to statues by my father's presence, recovered the functions of life. The first effect of our disenchantment revealed itself in a torrent of words. If silence had oppressed us, we made it pay dearly. The flow having ceased, I would call the chambermaid and escort my mother and sister to their rooms. Before I left, they made me look under the beds, up the chimneys and behind the doors, and inspect the stairs, passages, and neighbouring corridors. All the traditions of the chateau of robbers and ghosts returned to their thoughts. The servants were convinced that a particular Comte de Combourg, with a wooden leg, 3 centuries dead, appeared at certain times, and that he had been met with on the great staircase of the turret. And sometimes his wooden leg walked by itself, accompanied by a black cat. Francois-Rene Chateaubriand, Mémoires d'Outre-Tombe, Book 3, Chapter 1, 1849. Curiously, Chateaubriand himself in later years could be seen taking the air with a pet cat that may also have been black. Finally, at sunset, the door of the little house turned slowly and noiselessly on its hinges. A short man in black clothes, with broad shoulders, skinny legs, and a noble head, emerged, followed by a cat, to whom he threw balls of bread to make it gambol on the grass. Soon both cat and man were swallowed by the shadows of an alley of trees. The undergrowth hid them from my sight. A little while later, the black clothes reappeared at the threshold of the house and closed the door. This was all I could see of the author of René, but it was enough to satisfy my poetic superstitions. Alphonse de Lamartine, Cours familier de littérature, 1856. Poe was perfectly familiar with the French Romanticist scene, and while he regarded Chateaubriand more as a good travel writer than a novelist, it seems he particularly admired Chateaubriand's Itinéraire de Paris à Jérusalem and Génie du Christianisme. Poe's tale also concerns a black cat, ultimately also immured along with the narrator's hapless murdered wife. A cry, at first muffled and broken, like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long, loud, and continuous scream, utterly anomalous and inhuman. A howl, a wailing shriek, half of horror and half of triumph, such as might have arisen only out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony, and of the demons that exult in the damnation. Of my own thoughts it is folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered to the opposite wall. For one instant the party upon the stairs remained motionless, through extremity of terror and of awe. In the next, a dozen stout arms were toiling up the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, with red extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled the monster up within the tomb. Edgar Allan Poe, From the Black Cat, 1843. It seems possible, given Poe's familiarity with Chateaubriand's work, that he was aware of the story of the phantom black cat of Schomberg Castle. That is, if the story had been passed on by word of mouth, for Chateaubriand's memoirs were only published in 1848, 5 years after Poe's own tale appeared in the Saturday Evening Post. Poe himself also owned a black cat, which he described as one of the most remarkable black cats in the world, and this is saying much, for it will be remembered that black cats are, all of them, witches, a sentiment that is voiced also by the narrator of The Black Cat. A phantom cat of a similarly nemesis-like character appears in the stalls of Barchester Cathedral by M.R.James. The Dean, who has obtained his current position under rather suspicious circumstances, keeps a journal of occurrences that begin to haunt him, which include the appearance of a cat. October 22nd. The whispering in my house was more persistent tonight. I seemed not to be rid of it in my room. I have not noticed this before. A nervous man, which I am not, and hope I am not becoming, would have been much annoyed, if not alarmed by it. The cat was on the stairs tonight. I think it sits there always. There is no kitchen cat. November the 15th. Here again I must note a matter I do not understand. I am much troubled in sleep. No definite image presented itself, but I was pursued by the very vivid impression that wet lips were whispering into my ear with great rapidity and emphasis for some time together. After this, I suppose, I fell asleep, but was awakened with a start by a feeling as if a hand were laid on my shoulder. To my intense alarm, I found myself standing at the top of the lowest flight of the first staircase. The moon was shining brightly enough through the large window to let me see that there was a large cat on the second or third step. I can make no comment. I crept up to bed again. I do not know how. Yes, mine is a heavy burden. Then follows a line or two which has been scratched out. I fancy I read something like, "acted for the best." January the 7th. I have prevailed upon my cousin Alan to give me a few days, and he is to occupy the chamber next to mine. January the 8th. A still night. Alan slept well, but complained of the wind. My own experiences were as before, still whispering and whispering. What is it that he wants to say? January the 9th. Alan thinks this is a very noisy house. He thinks, too, that my cat is an unusually large and fine specimen, but very wild. By introducing a second witness of the cat, M.R.James manages to assure us that the Dean is not suffering from hallucinations. These feline encounters continue to the dramatic climax in true Jamesian fashion. In the denouement that follows, there is a hint at a form of witchcraft. Cats, castles, and rattling chains. These are a few of our favourite things. The Gothic soundscape has never gone away and echoes the experiences of the ancients. Our experiences of phantoms, from eyewitness accounts to literary endeavour, all share that basic human desire to thrill our audience. Happy haunting, and don't forget to feed the cat.
That's really weird. I don't know if it's true.
Yeah.
There was no apparition because apparently it continued to appear until this event.
And then you never saw it again, is that right?
Yeah.
Poor kitty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, poor bit.